Greetings, friends. It's Victor here, and I want to just take a moment to talk about progressive white people. As a person who is generally very queer, I tend to be in a lot of spaces with other queer people. To be fair, mostly with other gay and trans people, but also just like within the community, the LGBTQ plus community as a whole. Something that I found extremely interesting, and this is not a new phenomenon, and anyone who is a queer person of color will understand this, but something that I've been noticing recently and that has been weighing on me recently is just the overwhelming whiteness of queer spaces. I think a lot of times people within the LGBTQ plus community and allies for the LGBTQ plus community kind of think of themselves as progressive people who are advocates for others, etc., etc. But in reality, I think that there's a lot of work to do specifically as it pertains to race. The thing is, white supremacy in America is very insidious in many ways, such that the whole structure of white supremacy is convincing everyone that it doesn't exist. This can take the form of white people not acknowledging that racism is a system of power rather than individual acts, or this could also take the place of, for example, gaslighting non-black people of color, or even, like, the complicity of some, like, black communities in the system of power in order to fit in, which is not their fault at all, but it is a symptom of the system. Something that we need to understand as Americans, as self-proclaimed progressive Americans, is that racism is a system of power. Racism, lowercase r, might be race-motivated acts, but racism, capital R, is a system of power that chronically disadvantages certain groups and favors other groups. If you want to know more about this, I would highly recommend the following books. The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein chronicles the discrimination against specifically African American and Black people in America throughout the nation's history, really focusing on the 20th century. This kind of demonstrates how the systematic exclusion from housing factored into where we are today in terms of socioeconomic class being, especially in urban areas, largely defined by race. Secondly, The Color of Compromise by Jemar Tisby is a great book on the American Protestant Church's complicity in racism, if that's something you're interested in. Finally, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander kind of talks about mass incarceration as exactly what it sounds like: the new Jim Crow, the new slavery, the new form of systematic oppression of Black and African American and brown people. I think that white America has a very easy time rationalizing why their behavior is acceptable, why they have not done anything to perpetuate the system and therefore are exempt from the consequences of the system. And I think that fundamentally that is flawed. You see, systems like racism in America don't just fix themselves, they continue to perpetuate themselves, and they continue to make the gaps between the privileged and the disprivileged larger and larger. Now, I would of course be remiss if I did not mention the recent hate crimes against Asian Americans in this country, which is appalling and atrocious and, like, really unsettling for those in the Asian American community, myself included. I think it's been very difficult to watch my friends and other members of the community, as well as myself, struggle with and grapple with this. And it's worth noting that recently Asian Americans have been routinely gaslit by other racial minorities, as well as the white majority, around issues of racism. And I just want to say that that's unacceptable, and that different minorities experience minority stress and racism and prejudice in different ways. When I first heard the news of the shootings in Atlanta, my initial response was, well, this is what Black Americans have been dealing with since the beginning of this country. Which I'm sad to say is kind of an anti-Asian stance, and I have since, like, been able to, like, take a step back from that and say, like, oh wait, actually no, like, this is a big deal for our community. Either way, I did just want to bring that up to, like, put it out there. I think that the pervasive whiteness of queer spaces is in some ways problematic, because these are groups of people that politically and otherwise claim to be progressive in a lot of ways, and yet somehow we as a queer community are still so far behind when it comes to race issues. In no small way because oftentimes we as a community fail to recognize systemic racism and systemic oppression. Not only that, but I can speak from personal experience here as a person of color in queer spaces. The overwhelming majority of people in these queer spaces oftentimes are white, and just the general lack of awareness that it is a white-dominated space definitely leaves me feeling like an outsider in some ways. Anyhow, I don't think I have more to say on that, just that if you are a white queer person, please have racial issues at the forefront of your mind as you're going into queer spaces and as you're dialoguing about queer issues and progressive issues, that to ensure that race is a factor in that. Such problems. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Until next time.